Right now, somewhere on your property, there is a creature producing more usable protein per square foot than cattle, hogs, chickens, or any other farm animal you have ever raised, and it is doing it without feed, without fencing, without veterinary bills, and without a single minute of your labor. That creature is the common field cricket, Aceta domesticus. And before you dismiss what I just said, consider this one number. A single square foot of managed cricket habitat produces 9.3 times more complete protein per year than a square foot of pasture land dedicated to beef cattle. Not plant protein, not incomplete amino acid chains. Complete protein with all 9 essential amino acids, a bioavailability rate that rivals egg protein, and a feed conversion ratio so efficient it makes modern poultry science look primitive. You have been told your entire life that crickets are pests. You have been told they destroy crops, invade homes, and serve no purpose beyond feeding base in a farm pond. So why did one of the most advanced civilizations in human history consider them a primary food source more valuable than wild game? And why, in the century that followed European contact, was every trace of that knowledge systematically erased from the agricultural record? By the time you finish watching this, you will never hear a cricket chirp in your yard the same way again. That sound is not a nuisance. It is a protein factory operating at full capacity on your land, around the clock, at zero cost to you, and the only reason you were never taught to harvest it is because its existence threatens a $47 billion industry that needs you to believe you cannot feed yourself without their products. Let me take you back to central Mexico, the year 1402, roughly a century before Cortez ever set foot on the continent. The Aztec Empire was feeding a population density that most European cities of the same era could not sustain. Tenochtitlan, the capital, held an estimated 200,000 people on an island in the middle of a lake, and the agricultural systems that supported that city were nothing short of extraordinary. Most people know about the chinampas, the floating gardens. Fewer know about the ajodl, the collection of insect eggs and larvae from the lake surface that formed a staple protein source. And almost nobody knows about the chapulines. Chapulines were grasshoppers, and crickets harvested, roasted, and consumed in quantities that historians estimate rivaled the per capita meat consumption of contemporary European nations. The Aztecs did not view crickets as emergency food. They were not a fallback when crops failed. They were a primary, deliberately managed protein source, traded in markets alongside maize, beans, and squash. Spanish colonial records from the 1520s describe market stalls in Tlatelolco piled high with dried crickets sorted by size and species, sold by weight just like grain. The priests and nobility ate them, warriors carried them as campaign rations, mothers fed them to children. This was not primitive desperation. This was nutritional engineering at a civilizational scale. And then it stopped. Not because the practice failed, not because people got sick, not because a better protein source arrived. It stopped because the Spanish colonial administration, working hand in hand with the Catholic Church, systematically stigmatized insect consumption as a mark of savagery. Eating insects was classified alongside human sacrifice and polytheism as evidence that indigenous people were subhuman and required European governance. Colonial edicts in the 1540s explicitly discouraged insect harvesting and promoted cattle ranching on confiscated indigenous land. The encomienda system, which enslaved indigenous labor to produce European-style agriculture, was partly financed by the cattle industry that replaced the protein systems that had been feeding millions for centuries. This was not a natural evolution of taste. This was economic conquest disguised as cultural improvement. Cattle require vast land, centralized control, and capital investment. Crickets require none of those things. A population that can feed itself from its own backyard cannot be controlled through food scarcity, and every colonial power in history has understood that principle. The same pattern repeated in North America. Cherokee, Paiute, and Shoshone peoples all practiced deliberate insect harvesting. The Shoshone of the Great Basin conducted organized cricket drives that produced enough dried protein to sustain communities through entire winters. These were not foraging accidents. These were planned agricultural events with social structures and seasonal calendars built around them. By the 1870s, the United States government's Indian boarding school system was actively teaching indigenous children that insect consumption was shameful, replacing traditional protein knowledge with dependence on government-issued beef rations. The Bureau of Indian Affairs spent more money shipping cattle to reservations than it would have cost to simply leave indigenous food systems intact. But intact food systems produce self-sufficient people, and self-sufficient people do not need a bureau to manage their affairs. Follow that thread forward 150 years, and you arrive at a nation where 78% of Americans believe that animal protein can only come from creatures with 4 legs, 2 legs, or fins. That belief was manufactured. It was not inherited from nature. It was installed by economic systems that profit from your dependence on their supply chain. Now, let me show you why crickets work the way they do, because once you understand the biology, the suppression makes even more sense. A cricket converts feed into body mass at a ratio of approximately 1.7 to 1. That means for every 1.7 pounds of food a cricket eats, it produces 1 pound of body weight. Compare that to beef cattle, where the feed conversion ratio is roughly 8 to 1. Chickens, the most efficient conventional livestock, come in around 1.8 to 1 for broilers, but that number only holds under industrial conditions with climate-controlled housing, pharmaceutical support, and genetically selected breeds that could not survive in your backyard. A cricket achieves its conversion ratio in a cardboard box with table scraps. The reason is thermodynamics. Cattle and hogs are warm-blooded. They burn enormous amounts of caloric energy simply maintaining body temperature. A steer standing in a January pasture is converting a significant portion of its feed into body heat that dissipates into the air and produces nothing for you. A cricket is cold-blooded. It does not waste calories on thermoregulation. Nearly every calorie it consumes goes toward growth and reproduction. This is not an opinion. This is physics. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that every energy conversion involves loss, and warm-blooded animals lose far more energy per conversion cycle than cold-blooded ones. Your grandfather understood this principle even if he never used the term. He knew that a catfish in a pond was cheaper to raise than a pig in a barn. A cricket operates on the same principle, but at a scale and speed that makes catfish look slow. Here is where the numbers get difficult to ignore. 100 grams of dried cricket contains approximately 65 grams of protein. 100 grams of dried beef jerky contains roughly 33 grams. Cricket protein is not just more concentrated, it is more complete. The amino acid profile of Acacia domesticus includes leucine, isoleucine, and valine in ratios nearly identical to whey protein isolate, which bodybuilders pay $30 to $40 per pound to consume. Crickets also contain chitin, a polysaccharide fiber that acts as a prebiotic in the human gut, feeding the beneficial bacteria that your digestive system needs to extract nutrition from everything else you eat. No conventional livestock produces a prebiotic fiber as a byproduct of its protein. This is a unique biological advantage. Now, consider water. Producing 1 pound of beef protein requires approximately 1,800 gallons of water when you account for irrigation of feed crops, drinking water for the animal, and processing. Producing 1 pound of cricket protein requires approximately 1 gallon of water, not 100, not 50, 1. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a difference of 3 orders of magnitude. If you live in the arid West or anywhere that water is becoming more expensive and less reliable, that single number should change how you think about protein production on your land forever. A cricket colony in your garage produces more protein per gallon of water than the most advanced cattle operation in Texas. That is not a slogan. That is a measurable, repeatable fact. And the reason you have never seen it on a USDA fact sheet is the same reason you have never seen a tobacco company publish lung cancer statistics voluntarily. The cover-up is not dramatic. Nobody held a secret meeting in a dark room and decided to suppress cricket farming. The suppression happened the way most suppression happens in America, through money, momentum, and the quiet redirection of institutional attention. The American feed industry generates roughly $240 billion in annual revenue. That figure includes corn and soybean production for animal feed, feed supplements, veterinary pharmaceuticals tied to feedlot health, and the transportation network that moves it all. Every dollar of that industry depends on a simple assumption that Americans will continue to raise warm-blooded livestock that require purchased feed. A cricket does not require purchased feed. It eats kitchen scraps, garden waste, cardboard, and fallen fruit. A cricket eliminates the customer from the feed industry's equation, and an industry that large does not allow its customer base to evaporate without resistance. Look at what happened when the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization published its landmark report in 2013 titled Edible Insects: Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security. The report laid out, in institutional language, everything I have just told you. It documented the protein efficiency, the water savings, the environmental advantages, and the nutritional completeness of insect protein. The response from American agricultural institutions was not adoption. It was not curiosity. It was silence, followed by regulatory complication. The FDA classified whole insects as a novel food, requiring extensive safety documentation before commercial sale, despite the fact that humans have consumed insects for longer than they have consumed cow's milk. The USDA issued guidance that made cricket farming subject to the same inspection frameworks as poultry processing, imposing costs that made small-scale production economically unviable for exactly the kind of independent homesteader who would benefit most. These were not safety measures. They were market protection measures dressed in the language of public health. Think about what you spend on protein every year. The average American household spends approximately $1,200 annually on meat and poultry. Add another $300 on protein supplements if anyone in the household is active or aging. A backyard cricket operation producing 2 pounds of dried protein per week costs, after initial setup, effectively nothing in ongoing expenses. That is $1,500 a year staying in your pocket instead of flowing to a supply chain that starts with a seed company, passes through a chemical manufacturer, crosses a feedlot, and ends at a processing plant where the final retail price bears almost no relationship to the actual cost of producing the food. Your grocery bill is not a reflection of what food costs to grow. It is a reflection of how many middlemen stand between the soil and your plate. Crickets eliminate every single one of them, and that is why you were never taught to raise them. But some people were never taught to stop. In the Oaxaca region of southern Mexico, chapulín harvesting never disappeared. It went underground during the worst decades of colonial cultural suppression and then resurfaced as a point of regional pride. Today, Oaxacan markets sell roasted crickets at prices comparable to premium dried meats, and the harvesters who supply them operate on family plots that would qualify as large gardens by American standards. A single Oaxacan family operating a traditional chapulín harvest from a quarter-acre field of alfalfa produces between 80 and 120 pounds of dried protein per season with no purchased inputs beyond the alfalfa seed. Their children show none of the protein deficiencies common in rural communities that depend on industrial food distribution. Their soil, far from being degraded by the practice, benefits from the cricket frass, which is among the most nitrogen-rich organic fertilizers known. In Thailand, cricket farming has become a formal agricultural sector. Over 20,000 small farms produce crickets for domestic consumption and export, with the average farm occupying less space than a 2-car garage. A 2019 study from Khon Kaen University documented that Thai cricket farmers earn a net income per square meter that exceeds rice farming by a factor of 4.6 and chicken farming by a factor of 2.1. These are not wealthy agribusiness operators. These are rural families with concrete block enclosures, cardboard egg cartons for habitat structure, and kitchen waste for feed. The technology is so simple that the primary barrier to entry is knowledge, not capital. The families who succeed are the ones who were taught by a relative or neighbor. The ones who fail are the ones who had no one to teach them. Knowledge is the only infrastructure that matters, and that is precisely why it was removed from your cultural inheritance. Closer to home, a small but growing number of American homesteaders have rediscovered cricket farming independently, often by accident. A man in eastern Tennessee, whose name I will not share without his permission, began raising crickets in 2016 to feed his backyard chickens. Within 6 months, he realized that the cricket colony was producing more protein than his entire chicken flock, at a fraction of the cost and labor. He began dehydrating and milling surplus crickets into a flour that his wife used in bread, pancakes, and protein bars. His total investment was under $40, consisting of 3 plastic storage bins, a bag of peat moss, and a heat mat he already owned for seed starting. When I spoke with him, he told me his family had not purchased meat from a grocery store in over 2 years. His protein costs had dropped to what he estimated was less than $60 a year, and his garden had never been more productive because he was returning the cricket frass directly to his raised beds. His nitrogen inputs went to zero. His compost matured faster. His soil biology exploded with beneficial microbial activity. He told me, and I am quoting him directly, "I set out to feed my chickens and ended up feeding my whole family. That was never the plan. The crickets just made it obvious." Here is how you do the same thing, and I want you to understand that what I am about to describe is so simple, it will feel like I am leaving something out. I am not. The simplicity is the point. The simplicity is exactly why this knowledge is dangerous to the people who sell you complexity. You need 3 plastic storage bins, the kind you can buy at any hardware store for $6 or $7 each. Choose bins that are at least 15 gallons, opaque-sided, with smooth interior walls. Crickets cannot climb smooth plastic, so these bins become self-containing habitats with no additional modification. Take the first bin and cut a large rectangle out of the lid, leaving a 2-inch frame around the edges. Glue or tape a piece of aluminum window screen over the opening. This is your ventilation. Crickets need airflow or moisture builds up, and bacterial infections kill the colony. The screen keeps them in and lets air move. That is your primary habitat bin. Inside that bin, place 6 to 8 cardboard egg cartons standing upright. These provide vertical surface area, which is critical because crickets are not ground-dwelling creatures in nature. They prefer vertical surfaces and tight crevices. The egg cartons replicate the grass stems and bark crevices they would use in the wild. A bin with flat floor space and no vertical structure will produce stressed, cannibalistic crickets. A bin with egg cartons will produce calm, fast-growing crickets that largely ignore each other. This is not optional. It is the single most important structural element of your setup. Place a shallow dish, no more than ½ an inch deep, filled with water-soaked cotton balls in one corner of the bin. Crickets drown easily in open water, so never use a water dish without an absorbent medium. Cotton balls, a sponge, or even a folded paper towel in a shallow lid will work. Replace it every 2 days. Place a second shallow dish in the opposite corner for food. Dry food works best for the primary feed: rolled oats, cornmeal, stale breadcrumbs, or any grain-based kitchen scrap you have. Supplement with fresh vegetable scraps 2 or 3 times per week, things like carrot peelings, apple cores, leafy greens, or squash rinds. Remove uneaten fresh food within 24 hours to prevent mold. Your second bin is the breeding bin. Set it up identically to the first, but add one additional element: a small container, 3 to 4 inches in diameter, filled with moist coconut coir or peat moss to a depth of about 2 inches. This is your egg-laying substrate. Female crickets will insert their ovipositor into moist soil to deposit eggs, and they will do this continuously once mature, laying between 5 and 10 eggs per day for several weeks. Every 5 to 7 days, remove the egg container and place it in your third bin, which is your nursery. Cover the egg container with a damp paper towel and keep the nursery bin at 75 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. At room temperature, eggs hatch in approximately 10 to 14 days. At 85 degrees, they hatch in as few as 7 days. The nymphs that emerge are called pinheads and look like miniature versions of the adults. They eat the same food. They need the same setup. Within 6 to 8 weeks, they reach full adult size and the cycle repeats. Here is what you will observe. In the first week, not much. The colony establishes itself, explores the habitat, and begins eating. By day 10, you will hear chirping at night. Only males chirp, and they do it to attract females, which means mating has begun. By day 20, if you inspect the egg-laying container, you will see tiny white rice-shaped eggs embedded in the moist substrate. By day 35 to 40, your first generation of homebred nymphs will emerge in the nursery bin. By day 60, those nymphs will be approaching adult size. By day 90, you will have a self-sustaining colony producing harvestable adults every week. Harvest is straightforward. Place the habitat bin in a refrigerator for 30 minutes. Cold temperatures slow cricket metabolism to the point of immobility. Remove the egg cartons, shake the dormant crickets into a colander, and rinse briefly under cold water. From there, you have 2 options. You can roast them on a sheet pan at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 2 hours until they are dry and crisp, then grind them in a blender or coffee grinder to produce a fine, nutty-smelling flour. Or you can freeze them whole for later processing, or for use as high-protein animal feed. One bin operating at capacity produces approximately 1/4 pound of dried cricket protein per week. 3 bins give you 3/4 of a pound per week, which is roughly 38 pounds of pure protein per year from a setup that fits on a single shelf in your garage. The most common point of failure is humidity. If your bins smell like ammonia, the environment is too wet. Increase ventilation, reduce fresh food quantity, and add dry bedding material. Crickets are desert edge creatures. They tolerate dry conditions far better than damp ones. If you keep the habitat dry and ventilated, mortality drops to near zero, and production climbs steadily with each generation. Now, let me show you where this one skill takes you, because crickets are not an isolated trick. They are a gateway into an entire system of protein production that operates outside the industrial supply chain. Once you have a cricket colony running, you have a continuous supply of the highest quality animal feed available for virtually no cost. That feed transforms every other animal system on your property. Backyard chickens fed a cricket-supplemented diet produce eggs with yolks so deeply orange they look artificial, and the protein content of those eggs measurably increases. Pond fish, whether tilapia, catfish, or bluegill, grow 30 to 40% faster on a cricket-supplemented diet than on commercial pellet feed. Even a small rabbit operation benefits because rabbit does are more likely to conceive and carry full litters to term when their diet includes a consistent source of complete animal protein, which crickets provide and commercial rabbit pellets do not. Beyond the animals, cricket frass, the technical term for cricket droppings, is a fertilizer that outperforms commercial products in ways that should embarrass the industry. Cricket frass contains a naturally balanced nitrogen-phosphorus-potassium ratio of approximately 4 to 3 to 2, which is remarkably close to the ideal ratio for vegetable production. But unlike synthetic fertilizers, it also contains chitin, and when chitin enters your soil, it triggers a defensive response in plants. The plants detect chitin as a signal that insect pests are present, and they upregulate their own natural pest resistance compounds. This means your tomatoes, peppers, and squash become measurably more resistant to aphids, spider mites, and fungal infections simply because you applied cricket frass to the soil. You are not adding a pesticide. You are activating the plant's own immune system with a biological signal that the plant evolved to recognize over millions of years. No chemical company can replicate this interaction, and none of them want you to know it exists because a gardener who does not need pesticides is a gardener who does not buy pesticides. There is another frontier opening as well. Cricket oil extracted by cold pressing roasted crickets contains a fatty acid profile rich in omega-3 and omega-6 in a ratio of approximately 1 to 3. Which is closer to the ideal human dietary ratio than any commercially available cooking oil except wild-caught fish oil. Small-scale extraction is possible with the same manual oil press that homesteaders use for sunflower seeds or flax, and the yield per pound of raw material exceeds soybeans. A homesteader with a productive cricket colony, a dehydrator, and a hand press has access to protein flour, animal feed, soil fertilizer, plant pest resistance, and cooking oil from a single organism that raises itself in a plastic bin in the corner of a garage. This is not a single technique. This is a complete food and soil system that was understood in principle by the Aztecs 600 years ago, practiced by indigenous North Americans for millennia before that, and dismantled within 2 generations by colonial economic structures that needed you dependent on their cattle, their grain, and their supply chain. The rebuilding of that system does not require a grant, a permit, or anyone's permission. It requires 3 plastic bins, some egg cartons, and the willingness to look at a chirping insect and see what your ancestors saw. The most efficient, self-replicating, zero-input protein source on the planet. There is a reason the most self-reliant people in history always understood something about their land that the powerful did not want them to know. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was made to seem unworthy. It was wrapped in stigma and filed under superstition so that you would look away from the very thing that could free you from a food system designed to keep you purchasing what your own backyard already produces. Every piece of land in this country, from a quarter-acre suburban lot to a 500-acre ranch, is already producing crickets. They are already there. They are already breeding. They are already converting the organic matter on your property into complete protein, and all you have to do is stop poisoning them and start collecting them. The choice you face now is the same choice every generation has faced when confronted with knowledge that the prevailing system would prefer they never encounter. You can hear it, acknowledge it, and go back to the grocery store next week to buy the same protein at the same price from the same supply chain that was built on your ignorance. Or you can spend $11 at a hardware store this weekend and begin producing your own. Nobody is going to make that choice for you. Nobody ever has. The people who built the systems that feed you are counting on the fact that most viewers will do nothing. They are probably right, but they do not need to be right about you. Your land is already doing the work. Start collecting what it produces.